Okay, we're okay. We can begin again.
Okay, I guess we'll take it from the top. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Innu, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland, the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from the Shoal Lake 40 First Nation and Treaty 3 territory. My name is Neil Harden. I am chairing today's panel. With me on my left is Carrie Linklater, and on my far left is Ron Merritt. The assessor today is Cam Wong, and the recording secretary, Stephen Lund. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you're placed in waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted to the meeting. Kindly follow along in the City of Winnipeg Border Vision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment rule in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matter must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the board. The board is appointed annually by council and is independent of it and the city administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing, and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of Queen's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We'll then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions the applicant may have, and the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all the evidence about an application will be brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live stream recorded and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 8 on the docket today. We have an ambitious agenda, so I would appreciate if the parties would be precise and to the point. So the first property on the agenda today is 1340 Concordia Avenue. So Mr. Lund, can you please swear in the assessor and applicant?
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Cam Wong.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
City.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
My name is Omar Ashraf.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
All right. So as I said, the first property is 1340 Concordia Avenue East. Mr. Wong, you have the floor.
Okay. The subject property, the roll number is 040-070-54000. It's 1340 Concordia Avenue East. It's a residential apartment block that's 4 stories high. It was built in 2010, and it has 172 units with 220 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 are some pictures of the subject property and its location. On page 4 are some interior photos of the subject property. On page 5 is our income valuation summary. We used average rents of $1,362 to get a potential income of $2,812,000. We use a 2% vacancy to get an effective gross income of $2,756,000. And we used a 45% expense ratio to get a net operating income of $1,507,000, capped at 4.9%. We have an estimated market value of $30,774,000. Works out to about $178,000 per unit. On page 6 are some rent comparables showing that the rents we've used are in line with what's on the market. On page 7 is a summary of the income and expenses of the subject property. Their estimated operating income is about $1,507,000, which is in line with what the model has estimated at $1,507,000. On page 8 is information on how we derived our cap rates. Near the bottom of the chart is the multifamily chart, which indicates that the majority of the cap rates are between 4.8% and 5.6%. On page 9 are some cap rate sales. The one most, similar to or representative of some newer properties is 2290 McPhillips, which we have a cap rate of 4.79%. That is in line with what the model has utilized for the subject property, which is a 4.9%. On page 10 is some cap rate information from Altus Group. See that the more recent cap rates are in the mid 4% range, about 4.5%, which is also in line with what the model has utilized. On page 11 are some excerpts from the Municipal Assessment Act. And on page 12 is the income statement for the subject property. So when you for the subject property, the cap rate that we've used and the value that has been established is supported by the market, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value of $30,774,000.
Is that your presentation? Okay, are there, Mr. Applicant, do you have questions of the assessor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go on record and state that the 8 hearings will have very similar evidence from both parties. So while I will have more questions than usual right now, they will be carried over for the 8 files. So excuse me as I ask a few questions more than usual, but it's to save time and to breeze through the other files.
Yeah, that's fine. I anticipate that information like your cap rate study and all that will be common, and we'll spend more time on it on the first property, and then hopefully it will be considered in all the other properties as well.
Precisely. Thank you. So my first question to Mr. Wong is, did you inspect the subject property?
I've been to a few of the properties by Broad Street. I am not 100% sure if I've inspected this one.
Okay. My next questions all pertain to the cap rate, which is really the main reason we're here today. So I'll start by asking this: what pages in the evidence specifically pertain to the capitalization rates?
Pages 8 to 10.
And just to confirm, these are the only 3 pages on record in your evidence today pertaining to the cap rate. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. Page 8, which is the table that includes the office, industrial, retail, multifamily, and hotel cap rates. Is that an insert that has been used in other hearings this year in front of the Board of Revision, or is it specifically created for the properties under appeal today?
Yes.
It's an insert that's been used for other properties?
Yes.
And on page 9, the table of sales, is this also an insert that has been used for other properties, or is it unique for the hearings today?
It's used for other properties as well.
And the same question applies for the 3rd page that includes the graph. Has it been used in other properties appeals?
Yes.
Thank you.
It may or may not be used by everyone, but it has been used before.
Okay, thank you. The cap rates were derived using a multiple regression model or a computer model. Is that correct?
Yes, the procedure is detailed on page 8.
Okay. And did you partake in the creation of the cap rate model?
No.
Then who did?
We have a modeling group within our department that establishes the cap rates and the values.
Okay. Is there a reason they did not attend today's hearing?
No reason.
Okay. How many sales were included in the cap rate computer model?
I'm not sure.
Then
any sort of details with regards to the model, I do not know.
So there are no, okay. And so that follows then that you are not sure of how many sales of newer properties are in the cap rate model, correct?
Correct.
Okay. In your evidence that you provided, namely the 3 pages, is there any evidence regarding what factors or independent variables caused the model to come to this particular cap rate for the specific property?
No. It does appear that it does range between 4.6 and 4.9%, but with regards to exactly why there's a different cap rate for these properties, I'm not sure.
But for this specific property, is there anything in your evidence pertaining to what affected the 4.9 or caused the 4.9 to be generated?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Based on the evidence provided today, how can the board or myself as the agent for the taxpayer openly review and test the reliability and accuracy of the computer model?
Well, I guess maybe you wouldn't have all the details to review, but the thing is you could look at the final value to try to determine if it was representative of market or not.
You mentioned there are details that I could review. Can you point me to where those details that could be reviewed test reliability are in the evidence?
No.
So there are no details that could allow us to test the reliability and accuracy of the model. Is that correct?
With regards to those details, no. But the detail that is available is the final market value, and you could test that final market value of the that was established, and then against the market to see how accurate it is.
And how would I do so based on the evidence that you provided? Could you please guide me to that?
If you look at the estimated market value, which is about 30,774,000, you could look at that and look at other properties on the market that have sold, and you could to see if the final value falls in line with those market value sales. So you could test that.
But just to be specific, on the second page of your evidence, you clearly stated that the sales that you provided are not comparable specific to the subject property. Is that correct?
No.
I'll just refer you to the second page of the 3 pages, which is the cap rate evidence title page. And the last part of the first paragraph after the semicolon, it stated that these sales are not meant to be comparable specific to the subject property. Is that correct?
Correct.
So again, I would love to know how I can test the 30 million and its reliability and accuracy based on the 3 pages that you provided.
Okay, like I say, like we're trying to establish how a market value, and you can establish if the market value that we've estimated is accurate by looking at sales that have occurred in the market, and so you can test the final value.
Okay. I'll move on from that line of questioning, but I'll remain on the same page, please, which is page 9. Did you pick these properties to be included in the submission?
No, it was selected by a colleague.
And just to confirm again, so it's on the record, these properties are not meant to be comparable specific to the subject property. Is that correct?
Correct.
However, it says in the second sentence of the first paragraph that the purpose for showing these individual cap rates is to illustrate the accuracy of the model and substantiate the model-derived cap rates. Correct?
Yes.
In general, how can a sample of data illustrate the accuracy of the conclusion of its parent data set?
Like I said, if the cap rate that's utilized to establish the value, the final value, if the final value is determined to be reasonably accurate, then I think you can reasonably say that it's accurate as well.
Okay, specifically in this case, how does this sample of 6 sales, and I quote, illustrate the accuracy of the model and substantiate the model-derived cap rates?
Well, I mean, if you look at the sale price of 2390 McPhillips, it's indicating a cap rate of 4.9%. It's indicating a value per suite at 215,000, and for this subject property, we've estimated a value of 179,000. So I believe that's in a way substantiates the value for the subject property.
So you're just relying on the one sale to substantiate? No, sorry, to quote, illustrate the accuracy of the model and substantiate the model-derived cap rates?
It can be used to maybe substantiate the model value.
Okay.
I wouldn't say I wouldn't say I'm relying on it. But it does indicate that the model is accurate.
Okay. The range of caps of the sales ranges from 3.6 for the 9-unit property at 700 St. Mary's and ends at 4.79 for 2390 McPhillips. Is that correct?
Yes.
And as per the page prior to this one, it was indicated that the 20th percentile of cap rates for the city of Winnipeg for multifamily begins at 4.8, and the 80th percentile ends at 5.6. So it follows that all of these sales are before the 20th percentile of what the model actually generated for cap rates across the city. Is that correct?
It appears so, yes.
Is there a reason that only 6 sales before the 20th percentile were used today to illustrate the accuracy of the model? Or are you not aware?
I'm not sure. I'm just it does indicate that the lower cap rates that we've used exist.
To cross-reference back to page 8 that has the table with the office and industrial. In paragraph 2, it stated that cap rates were derived from time-adjusted sale prices. Is that correct?
Yes.
So any sale that transacts that the city deems usable to generate cap rates has to be time adjusted to April 1st, 2021. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. To go back to page 9 then, these 6 sales, they were not time adjusted to April 1st, 2021, were they?
I don't believe so. They were, no.
Okay. So just to summarize again, what went into the model, into the computer, were the time adjusted sale prices and not these sale prices. And as a result, these cap rates were not actually inputted into the model. Is that correct?
It's possible, yes.
I failed to see how that could illustrate the accuracy of the model if we're just looking at cap rates that did not.
Well, and that's
the
why
model,
if you look at one specific thing, it may not. That's why it's the best thing to do is to look at the final value. And if the final value seems reasonably accurate, then you could say that everything that went into the final value is reasonably accurate as well.
Okay. On page 8, it was mentioned that there were ASRs, or assessment and sale ratios, and other studies that were done by the city of Winnipeg in this assessment cycle to audit or to prove that the model is reliable. Were any of these sales included? Sorry, were any of these assessment sale ratios or tests included?
I'm not sure if these sales were included in the model.
And you did not include in your 3 pages of evidence what the time adjustments would have been. Is that correct?
No.
Okay. Staying on this page, could you confirm, please, what the Collier's Q1 2021 range of cap rate for low-rise properties was?
Does 5 to 6.
So it starts at 5, correct?
Yes.
And for Cbre Q1 2021, low-rise A, which is what I deem this property to be, what does the range begin at? Would it be 5.25 to 5.75?
Yes.
Okay. And for the Cushman Wakefield Q3 2020 cap rate for low rise, it begins at 5 and ends at 5.75. Is that correct?
Yes.
So none of the cap rates that the city elected to put, the cap rate data sets or ranges are under 5 for low rise properties. Is that correct?
For those, no.
Okay. And lastly, I'd like to bring your attention to the 3rd page of the 3, which was the graph that was inserted by the city's assessment department. This is an Altus Group graph. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Does it say anywhere on here what the cap rates or sales pertain to? Are these Manitoba general sales, Canada sales, Winnipeg sales?
It's Winnipeg.
And where does it state that?
Just on the top right.
It states that this presentation, I presume, took place in the Winnipeg Real Estate Forum, but it doesn't say that these cap rates specifically pertain to the Winnipeg market, does it?
It does not. But to my knowledge, it is to the Winnipeg market.
And just to confirm, there's a date at the top.
Yes.
What's the date here?
May 3rd, 2018.
And the valuation date for this cycle is April 1st, 2021. Is that correct?
Correct.
The graph ends at 2017, which would have been part of the cycle of 2018, 2019. Is that correct?
It's 2020.
The 2020 valuation date was actually April 1st, 2018.
Yes.
So this would have pertained to the valuation cycle that was 2018, 2019. Is that correct?
Yes.
So what
it also pertains to this one because it is pre-reference to April 1st, 2021.
So this is just to confirm a table that predates the valuation date by 4 years. Correct? There was nothing more recent that you could have included today?
3 years.
Okay. I think that concludes my questioning, but I do have a rebuttal that I submitted on Friday that I would like to bring up perhaps once the board are done with their questions.
Yeah, we will, what's the process we're supposed to use? Your presentation followed by a rebuttal. So it will follow your presentation. You can speak to your rebuttal.
Okay, so after I'm done with my evidence, or could I do it before my evidence if possible? Just around the same. So
It kind of makes sense to kind of talk about it now, or after the panel's questions.
Okay, we'll do it after the panel questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wong.
Okay, Mr. Merritt, do you have any questions of the assessor?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Mr. Wong, I'm just looking at your statement here, and can you tell me about the potential gross? You have a figure in here. Does that include parking?
Yes.
And the 2% vacancy is gotten from where?
It's from the vacancy information that we get from the income and expenses of property owners.
And the calculation of the expense ratio of 45.3%, is that traditional for a building of this age? Is that how that was arrived at?
I would say that's at the high end of the range, considering that it can be about 35% in terms of expenses. So from what I've seen of these types of buildings, it might be about 35 to 45% around there, and this would be at the higher end of the range.
So from your analysis of, you have quite a few returns from this company. So is that consistent, in regards to, you've probably looked at, or the city's looked at the expense ratios for this property over a number of years. So is that consistent at the 45%? Do you know offhand?
I would. I'm not totally sure. No, I'm not totally sure if how it compares to.
So the 45% ratio is according to the model then?
Yes, and like I was saying, with regards to the range for newer properties, it does it is within that range, but at the higher end of the range in terms of expenses for newer buildings.
If I may interject, there's a piece of detail here that I'm aware of, but I don't think Mr. Wong was part of this discussion. So there was a pre-roll agreement prior to arriving at the numbers, before the numbers were released, between myself and the assessment department. We were able to agree a deal on all the NOIs for all the properties today. Now, due to the short,
you're in agreement? You're in agreement?
We were able to
all the properties on the docket. So your argument is cap rate then?
Yes, and to be specific, some of them went up, some of them went down. We reached out to the City of Winnipeg's assessment department right before the closure of pre-roll. And because of the short period of time we had, we came to the agreement that none of the EGIs or PGIs would be changed. Only the expense ratios would be changed. As a result, you will find that some of the expense ratios are inflated today, but also that the income is inflated. So we came to an agreement that the NOIs were fair. In some cases, they went up. In some cases, they went down. Okay. And we agreed on it.
Basically, what you're saying, though, is that consistency in regards to all the presentations today NOIs are an agreement.
That is absolutely correct.
Okay, so the main focus then is going to be cap rate.
Cap rate and nothing but cap rate today.
Okay.
You
Let
can
me
say-
go back,
you can say
let
cap
me
rate,
go back
but-
to the assessor. And we're just gonna look at, I guess the cap rate that you've submitted here as evidence. As soon as I get it here. Okay, so Mr. Wong, your presentation in regards to evidence for cap rate, I don't see anything that would give an indication of where you're going to go with the cap rate for the subject of 4.9%. You have 6 sales in here that are current, but they're all over the map in regards to areas, in regards to the number of suites and the ages. So I don't know if I would have submitted evidence like this and gone to a model. So your comments, Mr. Wong, please.
The cap rates are there to substantiate the values that we have established. The cap rate is sort of one part of the value. So like when you're looking at the value of the property, it's, you know, when you look at one small part or one part of the valuation process, it may not give you the full picture. And so the cap rates that we put in here, they're there to, I guess, substantiate the cap rates that we've used. But I also ask that you look at the value of the property as well, because like if the value of the property is reasonable and fair, then I feel that the everything that went into that value, being the income and the cap rate and the expenses and the vacancy, is fair as well. So that's how I ask you to look at it.
All right. So Mr. Wong, basically you're saying that it's almost the presentation in there, but you don't have too much weight in that regard. You're hanging your hat on the model capitalization rate.
And the cap rates that we presented, and in this particular case, the property of 2390 McPhillips is actually pretty similar to the subject property, and it's coming in at 4.79%.
Yeah, but like I say, you know, you're all over the map here because the subject property is 172 units and it was built in 2010. So I don't know. It's nice to extract a cap rate, but we'd like to have something that is fairly relevant. Anyways, Mr. Chairman, I thank you. I have no further questions.
Harry, do you have any questions?
Yes, Mr. Wong, page 5 of your brief. Is that model driven?
It appears that it was reviewed by one of my colleagues, as Mr. Ashraf has indicated.
That's all my questions. Thank you.
Okay, I just, I guess for certainty in my own mind, there are 3 buildings in the area, and we're just dealing with the one labeled 1340 here. Is that correct?
No,
Or is it all 3
it's all
buildings?
3.
Yeah, it's all 3.
All right, I was wondering about that. And I guess I have no more questions on cap rate that haven't been asked already. All right, so you wish to do your rebuttal now and ask questions on your rebuttal, is it?
Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
I have provided you with the procedure in the folder.
Oh, there it is, yes. Okay, according to our procedures, we are supposed to have the applicant's brief. I should have memorized this, you know. We're supposed to have the applicant's brief followed by questions and the applicant's rebuttal. So can you begin on your evidence in chief then?
Sounds good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I'll begin with the file pertaining to this property specifically. It's titled Board of Review Appeal equals East Concordia Manor, 1340 Concordia Avenue East. It's a 19-page document. And it just pertains to the details of this property specifically. And then I'll move on to my capitalization rate argument and my economic indicator study. But please let me know if you have that file open and ready, and I'll proceed.
Okay, I have the documents. Everyone have the documents open? Applicant's brief and cap rate study.
Thank you. So page 5 is the summary of testimonial evidence and the issues of appeal that we have in front of us today. And these are identical for all the properties. So I'll do this once. The issues of appeal are that the assessment is in excess of its market value for assessment purposes. The cap rate is overassessed and should be increased to 5.00 in order to fairly depict the value of the property and the market value of the property. And that the cap rate established by the assessment department does not capture the market conditions nor the risk exposure of the asset class at the time of the valuation date. I take into account that the valuation date was April 1st, 2021. I will be presenting the subject property's physical characteristics and the maps and such. And that will be brief, especially because Mr. Wong did most of that already. And then I will take it to the Appendix 1, which is the capitalization rate model that contains 6 sales of recent comparable properties that I'm submitting as comparable properties. And they are market sales. And I will also discuss some board decisions from the Municipal Manitoba Board. And then I will go through my economic indicator study where I will show that based on the Colliers and Cbre reports, Cmhc reports, and multiple research reports and articles, that, in my opinion, the capitalization rate should be a minimum of 5.00. So that is my request for all the files. I respectfully request that the cap rates are corrected to 5.00 across the board. So I'll move on to page 11, please. And this is a table that will be inserted into each of these smaller files. And the property that we are discussing will be highlighted in yellow with an arrow. So historically, the city of Winnipeg has applied the same cap rate for all of the properties owned by Broad Street. This is as we go back as far as 2012, which is when I'm privy to the valuations of the properties that we own. This is the first time where the cap rates have been changed by property. So as you see today, we have 8 properties ranging from 4.6 to 4.9. I am baffled as to why that has happened, and I have been asking the city for explanation prior to this appeal. And through the evidence, I'm still unsure as to why there are segregated and different cap rates. I'm not sure how the model reached these numbers. I'm not sure what factors went into this, and there was no evidence as to what the factors and independent variables were. Moving on to the specific maps and images of this property, they start on page 13. So as you'll see, the location of the property is in the Transcona market area. Property was built in 2010 and has 172 units. The next page are some more maps of the property and its location within the city. As you'll note that all of our properties presented today are in suburban outer skirts of the city of Winnipeg. They're all low-rise properties and they're all wood frame properties. On page 15 are some photos of the exterior, 12 years old now, a bit outdated, especially compared to some of the sales that we will go through. And on page 16, you'll also see that the interior of the property is outdated as per the most recent condo finish builds in the city of Winnipeg. Of course, subjective, but you'll see there are no, the wood frame, there's no stainless steel appliances. The flooring is made of slightly more dated material. So is the bathroom, carpets in the bedrooms and the living room on page 17. And on page 19 is a reiteration of the request that I respectfully submit today. And it's that the cap rate is increased from 4.9 to 5.00. And it's a small shift for this property, but it's substantial for all the properties. That concludes this document, and I would love to move on, please, to the document that is the cap rate study, and that will pertain to all the properties. So please just let me know when you have it open too.
We have it open. You can proceed on your cap rate study.
Sounds great. So the summary of testimonial evidence is on page 4. In my opinion, the city has failed to establish how its model and its submodels reached the assessed cap rates utilized, and no independent variables were provided and how that affect the cap rate and how they do. I will highlight the inconsistencies that have arisen from the city's new model, I should call it maybe. I will, as mentioned, detail 6 recent sales of properties that are superior or at least equal to the properties that we will have on record today. All the information was either readily available online or was attained and verified by contacting the brokers that worked on the sales or other industry experts from Cbre and Altus. And I will begin that then on page 14, please. And that is a page from the city's online model for income producing properties. And in that model, highlighted in yellow at the bottom, I should also mention this. The document says it's 162 pages at the bottom. It was at the top. If you put the page number, you'll see in the PDF, it's 154. There were 12 redacted pages. I hope that doesn't cause too much confusion until we get to the very end. If you put a number page in your PDF application, it will lead to the same number at the bottom. So 14 is 14. But here is a page from the city's model, pretty limited in detail. The model, it states that the cap rates generated by the multiple regression computer model range from 3.85 to 7.4. And there's no mention of what sales were used, how many sales were used, or what the independent variables that affect the cap rate are. There are only independent variables that affect the PGI at the top of that page, but none for cap rate. This is not in line with what other cities do across Canada. So in my role for Broad Street, I handle all property assessment appeals in British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan for 6 years now. And usually it's common information in these online models as to how the cap rates or gross income multipliers were derived. The evidence argument starts on page 18. On page 19 is a quick table of properties owned by Broad Street. So on page 19, the first 4 are properties under appeal today in Market Area 8. They range in caps from 4.6 to 4.8. I am unsure as to why the property in 2013 build Bridgewater Heights, the first one there, has a cap rate of 4.65, but then the newer properties, Seasons and South Point Terrace, have a higher cap rate. And that leads to the implication that the city's model is saying that these newer properties have higher risk or lower reward or would be less attractive to investors. Now, this becomes even more problematic in table number 2, These are the properties owned by Broad Street in Market Area 10. One of them is under appeal today, River Meadow Estates, the oldest property in 2006. And then there are two properties that I will quickly highlight in the next few pages, 204 Burning Glass and 216 Burning Glass, or Creekside Terrace 1 and 2. For all intents and purposes, these properties are identical, as I will show, but there's a 0.15 difference in assessed cap. And this also applies for table 3. There's a 0.05 difference in assessed cap for two properties that in our books are the same property. So what is the effect of a 0.15 change in cap? That is on the next page, page 20. I assumed an equal NOI of 1 million. A cap rate of 4.9, cap rate of 4.75 leads to a 3.16% difference in value. So what might seem as something small, 15 basis points in cap rate, actually leads to substantial differences in assessed value and market value. You'll find on page 21 the two properties that I just mentioned, Creekside Terrace 1 and 2, both built in 2011, both by the same construction company and both owned by the same company. They're actually in the same, they're contiguous parcels that were just split up in the land title, but they're the same in everything else. They share, as you will see on the next page, page 22, the same parking lot, the same leasing office, the same garbage bins, the same website. On our website, broadstreet.ca, it's just one page for both. They're all 2-bedroom, 1-bath, but there's a 0.15 difference in cap rate. And then the next few pages show the same effects on the Main Street properties, but I think I've made my point, so I'll move on to page 26, which is the beginning of the market evidence and the sale comparables. As mentioned, and as you'll see on page 27, I have utilized 6 sales that I was able to vet. I was able to discuss with either the brokers that did the sales or market industry experts to ensure that the values I had were stabilized and correct. There are 3 sales, the first 3, Addison Square 1, Addison Square 2, and Waterford Village that transacted and were purchased by Skyline REIT and were sold by Ironclad/Altus. All 3 have a cap that ranges from 4.9 to 5.2. All 3 were built after 2017 or 2017. And the units range from 56 to 139 units. And all 3 sales occurred in 2019. So are recent and are part of this valuation cycle. The next 2 sales were sales that were purchased by Centurion REIT and sold by Devereaux. The cap rates are 5 and 5.125, again, 2017, 2018 build. And the units are 176 to 208. Both sales occurred in 2019. And this property is called the Pinnacle of Bridgewater. And lastly, Lumen Luxury Townhomes, which occurred most closely to the valuation date of April 21, so occurred in March 21, purchased by Thorwin Properties, sold by Marwest, cap rate of 4.95 and 148 units. As you'll see, the range of caps is very tight. It leads to a median of 5.06, an average of 5.05, and supports the requested cap rate of 5.0. All of the properties are recent builds. All of the properties are suburban located, and all of them have a similar number of units. Perhaps not Addison Square 2, but the rest are above 100 units. So the sale comparable locations follow on page 29. And again, just an indication that they are in similar markets to subject properties. So now I'll start going through the properties and all the details I was able to acquire myself. That begins on page 32 for the properties Addison Square and Addison Square 2 on El Tassi Drive. As mentioned, they were purchased by Skyline. What follows from page 33 to page 35 are the printed web pages for the properties from the Skyline website. On page 36 is the location again of this property specifically, or these 2 properties. Page 37 is an indication of how close these sales are to 3 properties that are on the docket today and being appealed. And as mentioned, the sales have a cap rate of 4.875 to 5.125, leading to an average of 5. So in my opinion, these properties are superior to the subject properties, as I will show. That begins on page 38. These properties have loft bedrooms, they have on-site fitness centers, a business center, media room, underground parking. As I'll detail at the end of this submission, most of our properties don't have a gym, a business center, underground parking, or any of these more luxurious condo finish amenities, as I call them. Page 39 are the unit amenities, granite countertops, high-end finishes, large soaker tubs. And again, there's a playground, fitness center, business center, underground parking. Next few pages are subject images. As you'll see, higher finish from the outside, more recent, especially compared to some of the 2006, 2010 builds that we will be discussing today. Moving on, after the images, you'll see also on page 42, of course, the interior finish is of a much higher quality than the subject properties. And the images end at page 44. On page 45 is the announcement by Skyline Apartment REIT that it purchased these properties, and the Waterford Green common property that will be the next comparable. Now, this is confirmation of the price, 71.6 million, confirmation of the date. Page 46 is an email between myself and Chris Marlin, who is the senior, or sorry, this is not between myself, it's between my boss and Chris Marlin, the senior managing director of Cbre Limited for their valuation and appraisal department in Western Canada. We reached out to him to get some of their internal information they have on these properties and some other properties. They were generous enough to allow us to have some of the income information they had and some of the details they had on these sales and the Bridgewater sales that I will detail further on. But on page 48, there's confirmation of the price, the vendor, purchaser, broker, IPA, and this will come up again in a few pages. The stabilized capitalization rate is 4.875. In the other part, at the very bottom, the transaction is understood to have occurred at arm's length. No known factors influence the transaction. 3 properties, as mentioned, 71.6 million, and the overall cap rate is 5.16 for all 3 properties. On the next page is a document from a company called Alatus Asset Management, which owned part of this property prior to it being sold. This is a document from 2018, and in it, they have the cap rate internally for this building at 5.0, as you'll see at the bottom under current metrics. They owned 25% of this property. So this document is 1 year prior to the sale and confirms that the cap rate that they had in mind was 5.00. The second Iltasi property, Addison Square 2, that was previously known as 11, follows on page 50. Again, confirmation that the stabilized cap rate is 5.125. Just to summarize, on page 51, these 2 properties, when you look at them together, have a cap rate of 5.00, which backs up and supports the requested cap rate. Next page is an article from westerninvestor.com, again, detailing the 71.6 million sale price. And crucially, on page 53, I was able to get the names of the brokers that brokered the sale. I reached out to one of them, Paul Shabbat, I hope I'm saying his name right. I've had the pleasure of talking to him on the phone and by email. And this brings us to the next property, which CBRE could not provide me with information on, Waterford Village. And that begins on the next page. So I reached out directly to Paul and was able to get his pro forma and his stabilized values for this property. I'll quickly show you on page 55 the location of the property specifically. Page 56 is another amenities printout indicating that the property has high-end suite finishes, fitness center, business center, underground parking. And as you'll see on page 57, this is a much more recent design. The property is at least as good or better, in my opinion, than all the subject properties from the exterior at least. And definitely from an interior, as you'll see on page 58, it's a very high finish, page 59, 60. Page 61 is the email that was sent to me by Paul. And then page 62 is the performa that he submitted, stabilized performa that was based on anticipated rent increases in the fall of 2019. Waterford, as you'll see by the arrow, this is what we're discussing. The cap rate, as per the NOI that he utilized for this sale, was 5.2, and it led the evaluation of 28.4. And at the bottom is another confirmation of what the portfolio cap rate for the three sales combined was, and that is 5.16, again, supporting the requested 5.00. Page 63 is the fourth comparable, and that is Lumen Luxury Townhomes. The location of the property is on page 64, relative to one of the properties under appeal today, which is South Point Terrace. And then on page 65 is the general location of this property in the city of Winnipeg. As you'll see on page 66, and I apologize if the pages are slightly unclear on these next few pages, stainless steel appliances, laminate carpet flooring, and of course, townhomes tend to be more lucrative for investors from my experience across Western and Central Canada. Higher rents, lower expenses, and I would say a more reliable and secure type of tenant tends to occupy townhomes, usually families, 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom, etc., as opposed to low-rise apartments. But this is just a general remark. Photos of the exterior begin at page 69, as you'll see, built in 2015, 2016, high finish. Page 70, interior photos, again, condo finish, and a few more pages of photos follow until page 74. Now, this is a news article I was able to find on renix.ca from 2019, so a year and a half prior to the sale date of March 2021. And through this, I was able to know who the broker of the property was and to reach out to them. Now, this was a portfolio sale or was marketed as such in Regina and Winnipeg. Porchlight and Mar West sold these properties, but they all transacted separately. Again, confirmation of the date at the bottom. On the next page, you'll see that is page 75. At the very end of the page, in the red square, for sale as a portfolio or individually, the properties offer roughly a 5% cap rate based on low to mid 200,000 cost per unit. I will move on to page 79. Now, this was a marketing document I was able to get my hands on. And at the top right, you will see that I put the icon of the capital in a red box, because I will reach out, as I will show, to the broker from this company and get details on the property specifically from him and the sale price and the cap rate. So as mentioned, this property was on the market for a while. You'll see on page 82 that the property was actually listed for 45 million. And as we discussed, the property sold for 41.98 million. So it took a while to sell, and when it sold for under the listed price. But the cap rate that was being advertised for the sale was a 4.93 cap rate. Again, supporting the 5 cap rate. Page 85 is the contact information of the person I reached out to, and that is Brian Oliver, Principal in Capital Commercial Real Estate. The email between himself and I follows on page 86. He confirms that the purchase price was 41.98 million and that the cap rate was 4.95. And now I'll move on page 88 to the last comparables for market evidence that we have on record in front of us today, which are the Pinnacle at Bridgewater that were purchased by Centurion REIT from Devereaux. The location of the properties follows on page 89. Page 90 is how close the property is to two of the properties under appeal today. 9-minute drive to get to both. And if you add a bit more driving time on page 91, now you're very close to 4 of the properties under appeal today. So this property is in a great location in comparison to half of the properties on the docket. You will note that this property transacted at a stabilized cap rate for 5 to 5.125, as I will show through evidence from Chris Marlin again. But then the assessed cap rate for the 4 properties in close proximity ranges from 4.6 to 4.8, nowhere close to the 5 or 5.125. And as we showed earlier on, a 0.15, a 0.1, a 0.05, or 5, 10, 15 basis points change in cap rate is huge for us. The year built is newer than 3 of the subject properties and slightly older than 1. Page 92 is the beginning of the amenities of the property. I would say that this property is the Pinnacle of Bridgewater, that is the highest end, most luxurious, the most superior of all the properties on discussion today. So there is an outdoor pool, for example, a 3,500 square foot independent community lounge and fun center, games room, event space, community barbecues, a business center, a resident lounge, and fitness centers. Again, very high finish. You'll see this begins on page 95 with the swimming pool that is utilized by the Pinnacle of Bridgewater residents and them only. And the community center follows in the photo below. The exterior on page 96, again from the other side. One of the community lounges, I believe there are 2. One of them is a game room, one is a community lounge type of thing, at the bottom of 96. And in 97, 98 is the games room that has an ice hockey table, another pool table, TVs, vending machine, page 98 that is, and at the bottom, the communal barbecues. 99, the biggest fitness centers and gyms I have ever seen, a multi-family property in Manitoba. And the exterior falls on page 100 and 101. Again, the property is at the very high end, what I refer to as a condo finish. And that follows in 101, 102. Now, page 103 is the press release by Centurion Apartment REIT that it closed the acquisition of this property. They bought 45% interest in this property. And this was in July 2019. And then in November 2019, on the next page, they purchased the adjacent property, which is 340370, or what is usually referred to as 344 Ridge Lake Drive in the submission. Page 105, 106 is the email from Chris Marlin, Senior Managing Director, Cbre, that we discussed. And page 107, 108 are the Cbre printouts. Again, confirming the prices, confirming the stabilized cap rates, confirming that these transactions occurred at arm's length and no known factors influenced the transaction. This is a prudent investor, one of the biggest investors in Canada. Centurion and Devereaux is also a very reputable property manager and construction company. And again, the cap rate for this property is 5.125. And the next page is Pinnacle at Bridgewater 2, 5 cap. And then on page 109 is just the summation of these 2 cap rates together would lead to a 5.06 stabilized cap as per Cbre and Chris Marlin's information on the property. Unfortunately, I'm not sure who the broker was. I would have reached out to them to confirm this information, but this is all I could attain. Page 110 is just the confirmation or resummation of the 6 sales in combination. Again, very tight range of caps, indicating that the number does lie around 5, and that all these properties are recent and a similar number of units apart from perhaps 1. The amenities sum up on page 111. you'll see that all these properties have things that are more akin to the superior properties in the city of Winnipeg, especially when you compare it to the properties on the docket today owned by Broad Street on page 112. 0 of the properties under appeal today have an amenity building, 0 have a swimming pool, 0 have a business center. 1 property has a gym, 2 properties have a social lounge. 1 property has a children's playground of the 8. 0 have a social patio, 0 have games room, 0 have guest suites, and only 1 has an underground parking structure. But the rest of the properties have at least 1 of these things, if not more, as you can see on the left side. To sum up, on page 113, in my experience dealing with the city of Winnipeg, they have always given us the same cap rate for all properties. For all purposes, these properties are comparable. As you saw from the tight range of cap rates, the market evidence also points to the cap rate being comparable. However, this is the first year where suddenly there's a discrepancy in the cap rates from 4.5 for the property at 3047 Ness all the way to 4.9. Crucially, none of them are at 5 or above, which is what the Colliers, Cbre, and Cushman reports detail. But in the past, we have been able to get an increase on the cap rates either through Board of Revision appeals, as was the case in 2018 when we reached a cap rate of 5.25 from 5 for all the properties, or through discussions and agreements with the city, where we were able in the 2020-2022 cycle to increase it again from 5 to 5.25. So this 5.00 request is still more aggressive and lower than the last 2 cycles. So it's nothing out of the realm of reasonableness as per the city's assessed and agreed upon cap rates in the past. And I would like to move on to page 115, please. And that is one of the 2 legal cases that I will be discussing today from the Manitoba Municipal Board. The decision is on page 116. This decision is titled Reach John Investments versus Winnipeg, 2018. This is a multifamily property appeal, and it pertains to cap rate. Just cap rate, no NOI, and it was in the city of Winnipeg, multifamily. So the parties agreed, as you'll see on page 117 in paragraph 10, that the income approach should be used. The only thing that was under questioning was the income approach or not. Page 12 is what the respondent, or in this case, the assessor for the city, Mr. Rob Lucky, presented as evidence. They brought up the multiple regression model, talked about the cap rates, but never presented evidence detailing how the cap rate established the values. Further, the city in this scenario did submit comparable sales to back up the market value, which is not what the city chose to do in this instance. For in this instance, the city clearly stated that the sales they provided are not meant to be used as comparable sales. Now, the board's rebuke of the city's methodology follows on page 118. And highlighted in yellow, I'll just go 1 sentence before the yellow if you don't mind. And I don't plan on reading much today, word by word, but it's just a few paragraphs on these decisions that I think are crucial to the outcome of this hearing today. The board notes the limited evidence put forward by the respondent. The respondent has referenced a cap rate study and a model cap rate analysis as part of the city's method to determine applicable rates. However, they chose not to produce the studies as evidence. No weight can be given to this information, as no supporting documentation was provided. On page 22, paragraph 22, the board is compelled to accept the evidence put forward by the appellant. Mr. Dupont from Altus in this case had a cap rate study, just like I did, supporting the appellant's position. And this is further supported by the Colliers cap rate reports, which I will also present today. The board finds it's important to note that while the city altered cap rates, Colliers has indicated stable and consistent cap rates from 2008 to 2010. No information to counter this rationale or to support altering cap rates was provided by the respondent. And the board in this case decided to increase the capitalization rate as per Altus Group's request. And I think this concludes this specific file. Actually, I'd like to refer you quickly to page 134 and 133. I chose not to rely on this as evidence. I only put it in the supporting documents. But these are 2 pages from an appraisal report done by Altus Group for Broad Street for properties in Selkirk in January 2022. And on the next page, they gave us a table of recent investment market activity. Of those sales, 3 of them were utilized today. That is 100 Southview Crescent. These are the townhomes. Index 2. Index 4, one of the Pinnacle at Bridgewater. And Index 6, the Waterford Village. You will note that the Index 3 is the 2390 McPhillips Street property utilized by the city of Winnipeg. And Altus actually had a cap rate of 5.00. That is 5.00 for the property. And of the 3 sales that we used, all the cap rates are around 5, 4.97, 5.18, 5.02. So Altus, their stabilized cap rates were in line with the cap rates provided by the brokers or Cbre. And confirmation lastly on pages 135 to 137 from Centurion themselves of the price they paid for the property located at 345 Ridge Lake Drive, $37 million. And I think that concludes this document specifically. The rest is supporting document that I could refer to in case it's brought up in questioning by the board or the city. But I would please ask that we now move on to the economic indicators appendix. And I will start once you let me know and you're ready, and I'll take it from there.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. Page 4, again, is the summary of testimonial evidence. I plan on showing and presenting that the cap rate for this asset class has never been assessed under 5.00 by Colliers or Cbre from Q1 2018 to Q1 2021. So I went through every single quarterly report issued by both companies from the beginning of the last valuation date, the end of the last valuation date, which is Q1 2018, to the beginning of this valuation date, Q1 2021. The rates have always been above 5 or 5 and have been extremely stable. Now, we have seen some properties today fall from 5.25 to 4.6, and I'm still baffled as to how that happened. I will also go through the last 2 Cmhc reports pertaining to the city of Winnipeg's market for multi-residential properties. These 2 reports established that vacancy rates increased, not just across the city, but specifically for the sub-market that is suburban low-rise properties in the city of Winnipeg. Rental demand decreased and supply increased for the asset class. This has led to stagnant market conditions, higher risk, and more turbulent and unstable market conditions that do not support a cap rate of under 5.00 whatsoever. So I'll begin on page 6. This is the cap rate, reported cap rate trends. Page 7 and 8 are 2 pages from the City of Winnipeg's evidence submission from 2018. And I just wanted to show that the table that is utilized here is very similar to the table that was utilized last time. I'm unsure as to the purpose of this page last time and this time, especially because on page 9, you will see that the cap rate for Colliers, low-rise, low to high, has been 5.00 to 6.00 throughout Q1 2018 all the way to Q1 2021. For Cbre low-rise A, the cap rate begins at 5.5, reaches 6, so 5.5 to 6, and does shift 25 basis points down, indicating the market slightly improved in Cbre's opinion to 5.25 to 5.75. Again, always above 5. I attached the first pages. The next few pages are just the Q1 2018 to Q1 2021. But all the quarterly reports are in this document as supporting evidence if you would like to take a look at it. And this ends at page 13. Now, page 14 is the beginning of the CMHC rental market outlook, that I think is important to understand how the market has changed since the last valuation cycle. The first report begins on page 15. It's dated January 2021, so only 3 months prior the valuation date. As you'll see on page 16, this is specific only to the city of Winnipeg as per the title of this page. The overall vacancy rate increased to 3.8. And Heather Boyer, senior analyst in economics, for a quick quote is, vacancy increased for the first time since 2015 as continued additions to new rental supply outpaced weakened demand. So this covers the 12 months prior to January 2021. So around January 2020 to, let's say, December 2020. Sorry, December 2020. I want to point to a few things on page 17. As we mentioned, the apartment vacancy rate increased to 3.8%. Weaker rental demand limited rent growth. So vacancy increased. You'll see that the last sentence again indicates that this is the first time it's increased since 2015. The next part of the page, weakened labor market conditions. So the COVID-19 pandemic and the resulting widespread economic shutdowns have led to an increase in the unemployment rate to 9% and reached 17% for the population between 15 to 24 that typically tends to rent multifamily units. Supply of new rental continues to increase. Of course, properties built in 2020 would have been decided to have been constructed around 2018 or 2019 by the construction companies. So there was a huge influx in suburban low-rise properties that were built around 2020, mostly decided upon in 2018, 2019, that led to an increase in the vacancy, combined especially with the reduced demand for the properties. On page 19, I think is another important part. So any prospective purchaser around April 2021 would have taken into account how the market was behaving. And as you can see, Cmhc report that the current market conditions limited the growth in average rents. For the first time, average rents were not increasing like they used to. Page 20 is the second Cmhc report. So this is dated 2022 February. So it would have discussed the first 4 months prior to the valuation date, January, February, March, April 2021. Page 21, you'll see Heather Boyer again states that apartment vacancy rate is up to the highest level since 1997. So why is that? Page 22 is more explanation. In the box, we can see that both the level of unemployed and the unemployment rate remained higher than February 2020. That is in October 2021, suggests that some individuals have yet to return to the labor market. More people moving back home, more people moving in together, etc., etc. Immigration remains considerably lower than historic levels for this period. And I'm going to discuss the immigration trends that occurred in the city of Winnipeg. And the vacancy rate moved higher on increase in supply.
If I can interject here, you seem to be talking about things that aren't related to cap rates.
Well, in my opinion, a cap rate is a measure of how the market perceives risk, reward, and uncertainty. It's just a cap rate is a yield rate that takes into account what a prudent investor or a reasonable purchaser expects to attain. So I think they're slightly related, because if I'm putting money on the table and I see that it seems like I'm going to be making less money because vacancy will increase or because rent growth will decrease, then I will be less inclined or motivated to purchase a property at a specific price. So this is where I think, if I may state, that there is a relationship between cap rates and the market conditions. But I'll move on quickly to page 25. This is specifically a vacancy rate analysis of construction by year in the city of Winnipeg. So all the properties that will be discussed today are 2000 or later. You'll see that in October 2017, as close to the last valuation date as possible, the vacancy was 2.3% assessment. On the next page, October 2020, as close to the valuation date as possible for the current cycle, it increases to 3.9%. So page 27, we discussed the supply of new rental and how that has affected investors' decisions as to how much money to put and how much to assess the risk at. Page 28 is the market composition. This is a graph that we made, or a few pie graphs. You'll see that the number of completed units in these cities over 2019 and 2021 is detailed. The light blue is rentals. The dark blue is condo. Between 2019 and 2021, 87% of all the units built in the city of Winnipeg were rentals. There was a massive influx that led to an increase in vacancy and led to less purchases to occur because people found that building the properties was making more sense than just to purchase as prices became less desirable and cap rates became higher. This is not in line with other cities in Canada. As you'll see, for example, Vancouver, Toronto is a big stark difference, but Winnipeg is the highest of this list of properties. On the next page is an article that discusses incentives and how property owners were paying a lot of incentives to try to lure people to come, lure is not the best word to use here, excuse me, but to try to incentivize people to move into their properties. The article is dated April 2021, so right around the valuation date. Page 30, you will note that in the first box, second paragraph, right now, there's a lot more supply than demand, the content directive for rentals.ca stated, and the landlords are trying to compete for the best tenants. So at the time of the valuation date, there was high competition, a lot of supply of properties and not as much demand. And this led to worse market conditions and more risk and more uncertainty that would have affected potential buyers and the prices and cap rates would have agreed to pay. I'll move on from this article quickly, and page 35 is a quick study on the economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on Manitoba. Page 36, the market conditions per Cmhc weakened, and this contributed to lower rental demand. I will quickly go through a graph on page 38 from the City of Winnipeg Economic Research Department showing the Manitoba employment rate and how it increased substantially or decreased substantially the employment rate in 2020 relative to past years. As you'll see, there's a stark decline in employment, and this would have affected rental demand. Page 39 is a quick article by CTV News. Again, valuation date April 1st, 2021. This is January 2021. Manitoba bearing the brunt of job loss. You'll see on the next page that Manitoba lost 6,600 jobs in December. Second straight month of job losses. And I just wanted to highlight on page 42, this is a table I was able to get from the Manitoba Bureau of Statistics, showing that really the unemployment rate in 2020 and 2021 was at historic levels compared to past years. You'll see that it increased from 5.3 in 2019 to 8.
We're kind of getting really off on cap rates here. I mean, you showed the cap rate sales, which is good information, but I mean, we're really getting very detached from cap rates.
I appreciate your guidance. Thank you for the comment. I'll keep this extremely brief then. I don't want to waste your time, especially since I still have to do my rebuttal quickly. So what follows on in the rest of the document is a lot of articles and reports detailing how in 2020 and 2021, in the province of Manitoba, the city of Winnipeg, and in Canada, COVID-19 really hit multifamily and real estate market in general hard. And I will keep it at that. The documents are there for your reference if need be. Immigration rates went down substantially, vacancy went up, and rental demand went down. I will just quickly go through the document to make sure there's nothing that I would love to finish with. again, this document is here for your review if you would like. And yes, if you think I'm going around a bit in a circle, I will take your guidance, Mr. Chairman, and limit myself to this, but the document is here for your viewing. That moves me on to my rebuttal then, if I may.
I will have to distribute that to you. So
We'll do the questions.
From me?
From yes, the assessor on your evidence in chief there. So, Mr. Wong, do you have questions of the applicant on his evidence?
I think maybe a couple. Go to page of the cap rate document, page 27.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay, Mr. Ashraf, you're saying that you couldn't understand why, I guess, the similar apartments have different cap rates.
That is correct.
If you look at 10 and 11 Altassi, seeing as the property names are Addison Square 1 and Addison Square 2, the purchasers are, Skyline, and the vendors are Ironclad, and I think Ironclad was the one that built it. It's the same builder. Why would there be a quarter point difference in cap rate for buildings that were essentially identical?
I do take your point. In my opinion, I think it's important to look at the three cap rates combined and see that they lead to a cap rate of 5.16. But to answer your question specifically, the properties do have a stark number of units, so 56 to 139. That could have influenced the decision. Perhaps there is a different unit mix that could have influenced the decision. But again, the difference is 20 basis points, 15 basis points. Different year builds and different number of units. Sorry? 0.25?
0.25.
So 0.25, different year build and almost 2.5 times the number of units. I presume this would have made a difference in the cap rates for the properties.
So I guess with similar buildings, it could have different cap rates.
As per sale cap rates, that is correct. So I think it's crucial here to make a distinction between sale cap rates and multiple regression model generated cap rates. If you're putting all these cap rates into the model, you would expect that the number that comes out would come to a tight range. Now, this is what the multiple regression model exists to do. It's to take all the independent variables and the inputs, puts them in, and gives us numbers. So when it comes to the generated assessed cap rates, I do believe they should be close. And I would hazard a guess that the city of Winnipeg used similar cap rates for both properties.
Yeah. Okay. I guess the range is in the cap rates that you've mentioned for the subject property is 0.3, right? Like 4.6 to 4.9. Is that correct?
Of the ones on appeal today, yes, but we do have a property at 4.5 that will be on appeal in November. That is correct.
Okay. And like I said, the difference between 10 and 11 at Altassi is 0.25.
Again, those are sale cap rates, so this is what goes into the model. It's not the output. So I would make the distinction that both are two separate things.
Okay. And on page 50 of the cap rate document?
Yes.
It says on the bottom of page 50, it says location, physical, income, and market, the transaction commentary.
Correct.
And for the income portion, it says the income projection assumes full occupancy and market rentals. The actual vacancy at sale was not known. Operating expenses per selling broker and stabilized to market levels. So like the cap rate that was calculated, it was based off of market information and not necessarily the performance of the property.
So when it comes to the rent, they were based on full occupancy. The property was on the verge of being fully occupied at the time. So you will note that the property was built in 2018. And I think it was done at the end of 2018 and it closed the sale at 2019 April. So they took the rents that they assumed would have been applied at full occupancy. That is number one. Number two, the actual vacancy at the sale was not known. That is correct. So I just did a quick calculation here. I took the vacancy of 28,000, divided it by the PGI of 940, and the vacancy rate is 3%, which is in line with what the city is using for the assessment of this property. Lastly, the operating expenses have been stabilized to market levels as per Cbre. So I would say there are three different things here. One is, yes, the vacancy and the expenses are stabilized to the market, and then the income projection is stabilized to the property itself at completion.
So the cap rate is not estimated, is an estimated cap rate and not necessarily based off of the actual performance.
All cap rates are estimates, I would say, especially when you take into account that the city's model takes time-adjusted sale prices and takes model-generated NOIs. That's an estimate. A model-generated NOI that goes into a multi-progression model is, by definition, an estimate. And by definition, as we all know, cap rates can change by 0.1, 0.2 sometimes based on the stabilization of the information. But I'm confident in the stabilized information provided by Cbre and that were verified by the broker who sold the property.
That's all my questions.
Okay, Carrie, do you have any questions of the applicants?
No question.
Okay, Ron, any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Omar, what is the date of this cap study? What is the date? When did this start? Is there a date on here without me scrolling through everything here?
So, like, when did I make this study?
Yes.
July 2022. But I've been looking at sales since they transact. I try to stay alert to sales as they come in appraisals provided to us by the appraisal companies or by news releases. So I had tracked these properties and made a note of them, but I finalized my cap rate study in July 2022.
I'm sorry?
I finalized my cap rate study in July 2022.
Okay. And it takes a while for us to adjust to all the information that is here. I'm just wondering if there's a difference, because I see the purchaser or the REIT. So a lot of them are REIT. So are these on the open market, or is there a difference between REIT and open market sales?
Thank you for your question. So I would say there isn't. For example, there is documentation that the sale between Skyline and Ironclad was brokered, and that it was on the market because of the news releases. Similarly to the Lumen luxury townhomes, it was on the market for a long time. It could have been purchased by anyone. That leaves Centurion and Skyline as REITs. So I'm very aware of their activity throughout Canada, specifically in the provinces that I operate in. And they are purchasers of multiple properties that are transacting on the market and that are marketed fairly and that tend to be able to be purchased by anyone. Now, I would make the last comment of saying that a lot of these properties are too expensive for mom and pop shops to purchase, and they tend to be purchased almost exclusively by institutional investors. And REITs have become one of the biggest players in the game in the last 10 years. We have seen Boardwalk, Cbre, and Skyline and Starlight, four of the main players, I think, purchase properties as soon as they come on the market quickly, and they have the contacts and the relationships in order to facilitate all these sales. But to my knowledge, yes, all these properties were on the market and could have been purchased by, let's say, Broad Street Properties if they had wanted to.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. No more questions.
Okay. I note that one of your comparables is townhouses. Is that cap rate applicable to walk-up apartments, basically? It would seem to be you're going after a different market in that situation.
That is a smart observation. I would add that, in my opinion, townhome properties tend to be a superior product that is more sought after by these institutional investors. It has lower risk, more income, and lower expense because of the utilities being paid by the tenants and because of lower management expenses. So historically, from my experience, if a cap rate of a townhome property is 5, let's say, usually low-rise properties are higher. So the reason I included it was to show a superior product transacting at 5, or in this case, 4.95.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Now, before getting into rebuttal evidence, I think we need about a 10-minute break or so. And then we hope to conclude this relatively quickly after that. So we'll come back at 10 to 11.
We are live.
Okay. You can now present your rebuttal evidence.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the rebuttal document is 25 pages, and it pertains to the 3 pages that were submitted as evidence, the only 3 pages regarding the cap rate by the City of Winnipeg. The summary of testimonial evidence begins on page 4. The city chose not to produce the cap rate modeling or the cap rate studies to back up their cap rate model. It was a choice. They were not obligated to do so by any municipal government acts or the Municipal Assessment Act or any regulations. It was simply a choice. Further, the city has taken, in my opinion, what I call a trust me approach. The computer says so, so it should be so. But no substantial evidence has been provided to support what the computer said should be. The burden of proof is on the city's assessment and taxation department to show that the assessments they provided are correct. In my opinion, the city has not met that burden of proof. I already discussed the Reach John Investments versus Winnipeg MMBO decision. In that decision, the board clearly stated, in a very similar case to this, that no weight can be given to this information as no supporting documentation was provided. By this information, they were referring to the city's method to determine these cap rates. And I should add that in this hearing, in the Reach John versus Winnipeg, the city had actually provided market comparable sales. In this case, they did not. Another decision I'm going to be discussing and referencing is a Manitoba Municipal Board decision also, and it's Winnipeg City versus Bazin 2005. I will be referencing 2 specific paragraphs in this decision, which pertain to a house in 2005 and its assessment. The city alleged that the multi-progression model came up with this number, and they did not support how the multi-progression model came up with this number. Also, the board stated that evidence must be capable of being openly reviewed and tested in terms of its reliability. I struggle to see how the city's evidence pertaining to the cap rate model can be tested openly and reviewed and tested in terms of its reliability and accuracy. And then I'm going to be discussing the 3 pages that were added by the city in my rebuttal. I'll start, please, on page 7. This is a document from the Manitoba government regarding how to hold a fair and effective Board of Revision. It was taken from the Board of Revision resource material by the City of Winnipeg. And in that box is a reminder, I know we all know this, apologies, I'm not here to repeat something we already know, but the assessor must present evidence that proves the value is correct. In my opinion, the assessor did not present evidence that proves that the value is correct. Page 9 is the cap rate table with the sales, the 6 sales. Again, it's crucial to remember what the city stated clearly in paragraph 1. These are not meant to be comparable specific to the subject property. Further, we know that the city time adjusts the sale prices and uses model-generated NOIs. So anything that goes into the model has to be time-adjusted sale price and has to use a model-generated NOI. Now, the city clearly states in paragraph 2 that the cap rates were derived by dividing the property's net operating income by the sale price, but in the sentence before that the NOI has been developed through stabilizing owner-reported income and expense information. I'm not here to say that that is not what is supposed to be done. That is what I've done for my sales. But when the city puts these values into their model, crucially, they don't put these sale prices and NOIs in. They don't put these caps in. So what we're looking at here is just a table of sales that are not comparable, a table of sales that have prices that did not go in the model, where the prices were time adjusted, and the cap rates would have been different because the NOIs would have been different. They would not have been stabilized owner reported income, but multiple regression model NOIs from the city's current cycle and their current model. Now, all of that taken into account, I would like to reference page 10, which is why I was baffled by the inclusion of this table in the first place. So page 10 shows, as per the city's model, what the 0 percentile is, the 20th percentile is, the 80th percentile is, and the 100th percentile of the output. They give us 6 inputs, which they stated are not the inputs that actually went in, but, for the sake of the argument, Sale C, which is 700 St. Mary, has a cap rate of 3.6. That is out of what the model actually generated as a bare minimum of 3.85, as per the city's income producing property model that they submitted online. Further, the next 5 sales are all before the 20th percentile. So the city alleges that this is, and I quote, to illustrate the accuracy of the model and substantiate the cap rates. Yet 1 sale is out of the realm of the percentiles and 4 are before the 20th percentile, leaving 18 more percentiles unsupported, in my opinion. Further, these sales do not take into account the value add proposition that the potential investors could have seen. In my experience, assessing multifamily properties, a 3.6 cap rate is almost exclusively reserved for Vancouver and Toronto, maybe Kelowna in Canada. I struggle to see how a property with 9 units built in 1961 in the city of Winnipeg has a cap rate of 3.6. But I do not believe that these sales illustrate the accuracy of the model, nor do they substantiate the cap rates. On the next page, as Mr. Wong...
Sorry, Omar. I was just wondering, with regards to, is this rebutting anything, or is this sort of continuation? Do you know what I mean?
Yes, this is rebutting the city's evidence specifically,
Okay.
and is just doing a visual representation of the table that was added.
Yeah, because you're kind of stating what's already there.
Noted. I'll make note of that. I believe some of this already came up in cross-examination. So for the sake of brevity, for example, I'll be as quick as possible on the next few pages. That brings us to page 12, which is the city's evidence as per the Collier's Cbre Cushman rates they included versus the assessed cap rates. So this takes something the city submitted and takes something the city assessed. As Mr. Wong indicated, all the cap rate ranges the city decided to use began at 5. However, all the assessed cap rates on the docket today are below 5. I have not found any evidence to support that in the city's submission. Lastly, I'm going to quickly skip to page 14 and bring up the Manitoba Municipal Board order that rebuts the city's evidence or lack thereof. So on page 15, as a reminder, again, I don't think we need it, but just want to have it on record if you don't mind me, that municipal board orders are acceptable evidence because they provide guidance to the panel on the interpretation of the law and proper application of appraisal methodology. So the decision that I had referenced follows on the next page, and that is Winnipeg versus Bazin from 2005. In paragraph 3, it stated that the Board of Revision had the value at 165. The assessor was seeking to increase this value. I'll skip to page 30, where in the analysis and conclusion, there was another rebuke as to the lack of evidence and detail done by the city in this case that I think mirrors the case we have today, which is why I'm bringing it up. And this is the last time I'm going to read anything, but 30, from the evidence that has been submitted, the board is unable to decipher how the assessor has come to the assessed value. In this case, it's the cap rate of 4.9. The only substantial explanation given is that the value was derived by the assessment department's multiple regression model. No explanation has been given about how the multiple regression model was applied, and in particular, what factors caused the model to come to this number. 31, the board is reluctant to accept a position from the assessment department on value without any explanation to justify that position. The fact that the department uses a multiple regression model does not displace the department's requirement to establish value in individual appeals on the basis of substantive evidence. The evidence must be capable of being openly reviewed and tested in terms of its reliability. Akin to the case that we have today, the factors that led to the multiple regression model 4.9 cap rate computer number have not been disclosed. No detail has been given as to how these numbers were arrived at. Further, the evidence that has been presented today cannot be openly reviewed and tested in terms of its reliability, neither by the taxpayer nor by the board that we have today. And that concludes my rebuttal. And I will, if you have any questions, please let me know.
Okay, Mr. Wong, do you have any questions on the rebuttal?
I think you're on mute, Mr. Wong.
No, but I'm not sure what exactly it was rebutting. That's all.
Just to quickly comment on that, I'm rebutting the lack of evidence. I'm rebutting and I'm stating that no weight should be applied on something that has not been supported with detail, nor can be tested for reliability by the board nor by myself. Also, I wanted to show that the two tables that were used by the city actually support my position. For one, all the sales that were added are before the 20th percentile and do not illustrate the accuracy of the model.
Okay, we've gone over that before, so let's just move on with any further questions. Mr. Wong?
No.
Mr. Merritt, any questions?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Carrie, any questions?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I have no questions either. Other than the observation that I did not really remember that city, that board of municipal board decision. It's a long time ago. All right. So now we come to summation. Does either party wish to make any summation? Mr. Wong, do you have any summation you wish to make?
I think there was, I guess, a rebuttal information that I provided as well.
Did you have rebuttal information?
He does. He was waiting for him to indicate if he wished to use it.
Okay, so okay. Do you wish to speak to your rebuttal information?
Yes.
Okay.
So I will distribute that.
Yep. I wasn't aware there was rebuttal.
And I have not received it. Was I supposed to receive it?
I think
I will be sharing it with you in a moment.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so you should all have it in your folder now.
All right.
Okay. And you should be receiving it by email just in a second here. Please let me know when you have it.
Will do. I received it, but the computer system is just scanning it. I'm sure there's nothing malicious, but bear with me here, please.
Okay, do you have it?
Not yet. Nope. Got it and opened it.
Oh, you've opened it? Okay.
Yes.
So, Mr. Wong, you can begin then.
Sure. I guess this is rebutting the evidence regarding 100 Southview Crescent with regards to Broad Street, stating that the cap rate is 4.95%. The property sold in March 2021, so I feel it's reasonable to use their 2020 income statement to try to establish a cap rate. If you look at the right of my chart, the income was $2,000,009. Their expenses were about $1 million, and their net income is about $1,916,000, which when you apply that against the cap rate, against the sale price of $41,980,000, that's indicating that the cap rate is 4.57%, which is lower than the 4.95 that was indicated in Mr. Ashraf's cap rate study. See on page unfortunately, I didn't number my document, but on the third page, at the bottom it says page 2 of 2. It says that the net income before amortization and debt is $1,918,000, and it's a little bit higher than the $1,916,000 that I have on my first page, just because I excluded the interest income, which we don't normally include as part of the income. So they said it's just indicating that the cap rate is, it looks like it's more along lines of 4.57 versus what was indicated at 4.95. And then on my last page, it's just a list of properties in appeal, and it's what this is indicating is the applicant's appeals has indicated that the properties are in excess of market value, and I just like to point out that if the properties in appeal, the average assessed value is $202,000. Or the median value is $202,000 per unit. Does everybody see that?
Yep.
And the comparable sales that was brought forth by the applicant is indicating a median value of $220,000 per unit. So I just wanted to show that the statement that the assessments are in excess of its market value is, I don't feel it's accurate, and this is just showing that the assessed values are reasonable, which in the end, I think that's what we're about here is market value, and not necessarily about the incomes and the vacancies. I mean, if you're going to look at that, you should look at all of it: the income, the vacancy, and the cap rate, to try to and if it yields an accurate market value, then I feel that that everything that the model has been accurate in its assessment. And so, this is just to sort of rebut the assertion that the assessments are in excess of market value, especially considering that when you look at comparable sales are on average like 20,000 per unit higher than what the assessments are at. Feel that the assessed value is right in line with where it should be, as the other properties and the comparable properties that were brought forth by the applicant, they do seem to be have more amenities. So, but at the same time, the median value is almost $20,000 lower than what the comparable sales are. So that's what this rebuttal information is.
Okay, Ms. Ashraf, any questions on the rebuttal information?
Yes, please. I just had 3 pages in my rebuttal. So my rebuttal evidence was page 1, the table for 100 Southview Crescent, and then the request for information. I did not have the last page that Mr. Wong was referencing. But I do take his point, even like the numbers that he said sound familiar. So I would like to cross-reference the rebuttal and to answer, that question was something in my supporting documents in the cap rate file, please. And that will be found on page, if you put the number at the top, 145, but if you look at the number at the bottom, it's 153. And please let me know when you're there, and then I will explain why.
We're looking for?
So we're looking for page 153 of 162 at the bottom, or page 145 if you put the number at the top. It's dependent on how.
The cap rate study?
That's right. Yes.
Okay.
And it's a blue and green table.
Yeah. We'll have it.
Okay.
Sorry. 145?
145 if you put the number at the top, but if you look at the number at the bottom, it's 153.
153.
153.
Okay. Oh, in your cap rate study?
That's right. It's a blue and green table.
Okay. Yeah.
So Mr. Wong referenced that I had not brought up income. I had not, because I didn't want to bring up assessments, and I don't have access to the actual income of these properties. However, in my supporting documents, I did an analysis on the average advertised rent for these properties in April 2021 versus the properties on the docket today. So what are we looking at here? The first 4 properties are the properties that sold that I have as comparables. What follows are the 8 properties that are under appeal today owned by Broad Street. The first 4 properties in green have an average of the last advertised rent in April 2021 at the valuation date. These numbers are tracked by Broad Street internally. I attached the supporting documents in the next few pages. We track them all internally on a monthly basis and save them to know what these competitors are advertising online. It helps us make our decisions. So the numbers that you see for 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom are the average advertised rent as of the valuation date. Now, at the bottom, the blue properties are our properties. I took the weighted average per number of unit of the same thing, the advertised properties that the advertised rents. For reference, you'll find that at the very end of the document, last 2 pages. So 1 page before the end of the document, or 161 of 162, are the properties that are under appeal today, not confidential information, and the average rent that we were advertising at the time. I'll point this back to the blue and green table to show how I looked at the incomes of the properties and compared them to each other. You'll find that all 4 properties that sold make substantially more money per unit than we do. Advertised as the valuation date. This is, back in the blue and green table. On page 153 of 162, for example, the Pinnacle at Bridgewater, the property with the swimming pool and the huge community lounge, was advertising rents of $1,765 Lumen Townhomes, 1733.
Okay, but is there a question? You're questioning the assessor on his rebuttal evidence.
You mentioned that I had not taken into account income into consideration. My question was, have you taken a look at these pages that clearly indicate that the 4 properties that I'm comparing our subject properties to have attained and continue to attain much higher rents advertised online?
Well, like what I was just saying is that when you look at the value, like the most important thing is the market, is the end value. And you know what, whether the cap rate is a little bit higher or a little bit lower, if the market value at the end is accurate, then we believe that the assessment is accurate, even rather than sort of really focusing on you know, a particular area to try to look at the whole. But my rebuttal was just sort of saying that the values seem to be reasonable, seem to be fair, and that when you look at the information, their income and expense information, and apply that against, for 100 Southview, when you look at their income and expense statement and apply their operating income against the sale price, that's what their indicated cap rate was, which is just a little bit lower than what might have been indicated in your report. So that's pretty much what it was saying.
Thank you for your answer. And just to bring it back to 100 Southview Crescent, if I may, you mentioned that as per the city's information, then the cap rate becomes 4.57. I just want to comment that even if we were to take the 4.57 cap with information I have not reviewed, nor do I know if it's stabilized or not, taking all of that into account, and even if we were to use the 4.57 cap, that does not change the median of the properties that I have here. It still remains 5.06. It does change the average to 4.98, which supports the cap of 5. This is why I was keen to try to bring a sample of comparable sales. So I just want to put it on the record that even if we were to take the 4.57 that I have not reviewed, it does not alter the sample's median and slightly alters the sample's average. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Merritt, any questions on the city's rebuttal evidence?
I have none.
Terry, any questions?
I have none, thank you.
Okay, I have no questions. And a brief summary, Mr. Wong?
I think I've said it, but with regards to what we're doing here, it's like we're trying to establish market value, and when we look at the cap rates, we feel that the cap rates are supported by the market, and when you look at the comparable sales that have been provided by the applicant, our values are very reasonable, as they're, you know, maybe almost 20,000 lower. So considering that the values do seem to be supported by market sales, I ask that you confirm the assessment at $30,774,000.
Okay, Mr. Ashraf, as a brief summation.
Thank you. I just received the updated rebuttal right now, so I just had a chance to take a look at the tables, so I'll quickly touch on that. The range of values that we have assessed is still inexplicable to me. I'm unsure as to why the property located at 590 Sterling Lion Parkway has a higher assessed price per unit than any of the sales apart from the townhomes. I just don't know why, and I'm still unaware as to how the multi-progression model came up with these numbers. Also, there are some properties in here, such as the last one, 2475 Waverly, that are still higher than some of the values for sales that we looked at. So I feel like it's slightly, the regurgitated information here does not clearly represent the fact that market value has been supported. I will bring it back to my summary now. $311 million worth of property assessment values being appealed today. I estimate that the payable property taxes for these properties, when you include the education tax rebate, will be $2,918,000. So that's $3 million worth of taxes in 2023, let alone 2024. The city chose to insert the same 3 template pages in their evidence only to support the cap rate. They knew that the NOI was agreed upon, so they knew the cap rate was the issue, and it was 3 inserts It's important to note here the city chose to do so. It was not an obligation. The city has referenced the multiple regression model, but decided not to provide the factors that affect the model. They chose not to establish and defend market value in their 3 pages in each individual appeal on the basis of clear and separate evidence. The city chose not to provide the cap rate studies as evidence. They chose not to provide the time adjustments. They chose not to provide any of the ratio studies to defend their model. They chose not to provide any evidence that proves the 4.6, 4.65, 4.7, 4.8 are correct as per their duty and the burden of proof placed upon them by the Municipal Assessment Act. Merely they handpicked 6 sales that could have acted as market evidence of value. Instead, they clearly state that these sales are not comparable sales. They declared that the sales illustrate the accuracy of the model, but chose not to show or explain how these sales illustrate the accuracy of the model, nor substantiate the cap rate model. They added a table of cap rates for all different types of income-producing properties. And ironically, the low-rise Colliers, Cbre, and Cushman Wakefield cap rates they put in their evidence do not support their assessed cap rates. In fact, they add more support to my argument that the cap rates are too aggressive and should be increased to at least 5.00. As per the Winnipeg versus Bazin 2005, evidence must be capable of being openly reviewed and tested in terms of its reliability. And as per Reach John versus Winnipeg, no weight can be given to information where no supporting documentation was provided. What I provided today was a list of similar and comparable market sales that support an increase in the cap rate and show that it's warranted. What I also provided is every quarterly report issued by Colliers and Cbre from Q1 2018 to 2021. In these reports, not once did Colliers or Cbre state that the range for low-rise caps in Winnipeg is at 4 point something. It was always a minimum of 5.00 and remained so until the valuation date. I also showed the Cmhc studies indicating that in the 2 years prior, the market was weaker, and that would have affected the risk that people would have taken into account when purchasing properties. Why has the city of Winnipeg decided to issue historically low cap rates for the properties under appeal? I do not know. Why did they issue different cap rates for very similar properties? I don't know. I have asked, I've called, I've emailed, I've appealed, and I remain honestly uncertain. And this is because the city chose not to explain, support, or substantiate these cap rates in front of the board today to a reasonable and correct manner. And crucially, I believe the board today should make their decision on the basis of the evidence presented today, and on that basis specifically. So I respectfully request that the board corrects the unsupported and staggered cap rates that the properties are assessed at by issuing a minimum of 5.00 cap rate across the board. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now let's move on to 525 Pegwis. And having heard a lot of evidence on the cap rate, can I just please ask the parties now to concentrate on what is specific about this, the upcoming properties. So, Mr. Wong, you can proceed.
Sure. The subject property is 525 Pegwis. The roll number is 040072 50000. It's a residential apartment block that's 4 stories high. It was built in 2013. It has 160 suites and 239 outdoor parking stalls. This property is very similar to the previous property. Actually, all the properties on this docket are fairly similar. They're all newer, and the construction is very similar. The information provided is also very similar. And yeah, if you flip through the pages, you'll see that the information is almost identical, except for it being a different property. And everything else would be the same as per the previous property.
Okay, does that conclude your presentation?
Yes.
Okay, questions, Mr. Ashraf? again, specific to this property, we will take into account the evidence being presented on the cap rate and that sort of thing.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have no further questions for this specific property, and I'll just carry over my line of questioning from the parent.
Okay, Mr. Merritt,
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Linklater.
I have none, thank you.
All right, and I have none. So, Ms. Ashraf, on your presentation on this property then.
Thank you. So I'll keep it short again. Just let me know when you have the file open, and I'll start.
Yeah, we have it open.
I'll skip to the subject maps and images because I think we've covered how the properties are assessed. And Mr. Wong has done a good job discussing the property specifically. Again, the location of the property is on page 13, closely located to the last property. It's important to note that while these properties are very comparable, they have different cap rates. Again, I'm not sure why. And then the photos for the subject property follow on pages 15 and 16. I think it's obvious to say that based on the comparable photos we saw, the level of finish is different and the properties are expected to attain a lower assessment and a lower sale price if they were to transact. However, I believe the cap rates would be similar, for they are they operate in the same market, even if they are on the different ranges or ends of the market. And the request is on page 18. I respectfully request again a cap rate of 5.00. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Wong, any questions?
No questions.
Mr. Merritt,
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Carrie?
No questions, thank you.
All right, thank you. So we will move on to 1153 St. Anne Road. Just
865 Planet.
Oh, 86, sorry, I'm ahead of my time. 865 Planet. Okay, on 865 Planet.
Yeah, the subject property is 865 Planet. The roll number, excuse me. The roll number is 040-072-565-35. It's a residential apartment block that's 5 stories high. It's built in 2020. It has 335 suites with 402 outdoor parking stalls. The location is on page 3, and there's some pictures on page 4. Page 5 is our income valuation summary. And on page 8, 9, 10 is information on our cap rates. The last page is the income statement for the subject property. Once again, property is very similar to the first property. Everything is supported by the market, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $69,364,000.
Okay. Questions, Mr. Ashraf?
Yes, please, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd like to refer to page 6. So rent comparables here that were put in by the city. Rent comparable 1, 20 Altasi Drive, is actually the same property that I have in my list of comparable sales, which is called 10 Altasi Drive, just different civic address versus advertised address. Proof of that can be found in the number of units, 139 units for both, and the fact that the effective year built is 2017. Now, Mr. Wong, in your experience assessing multifamily properties, would you say the following statement is correct? It is conceivable for 2 properties to have different assessments based on income.
Yeah.
Would you agree that the assessed average monthly rent for that comparable one is $1,415?
It appears so, yes.
And would you agree that the assessed average monthly rent for the subject property is $1,295?
Yes.
And that is a difference of around $1,020 per unit for every unit?
Yes.
Thank you. That's all I have, and I'd like to carry over my questioning from the first file. Thank you.
Harry, any questions of the assessor?
I have no questions, thank you.
Ron, questions?
I just have one, Mr. Wong. This particular property was built in 2020.
Yes.
So you're using a cap rate of 4.7, correct?
Yes.
So I'm just going back to our first one that we had. So you used the cap rate of 4.9. The next one on Peguis, you used 4.8. Now this one here, 4.7. So the logic behind it is because of the age.
I'm actually not sure what the difference is, but from what I've seen, like the cap rates can range from for these types of properties, it can range from maybe in the 4% to the low 5% range. So I can't explain the 0.1, but it definitely like the 4.6 and 4.7 do fall within the range. But unfortunately, I can't explain the 0.1.
That's all the questions I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Ashraff, you can begin your presentation then.
Thank you. Just making sure I'm on the right property. Yes. Thank you. So I'll take us again just quickly to the subject maps and images. Property is located very closely to the first two properties. Again, different cap rates, and what follows is the map of the property and an overhead view of the property's location within the city of Winnipeg. The only amenity of note in this property is a children's playground, as you can see on page 15, but that is something that is extremely common with these newer properties. There's no gym, there's no business center, there's no amenity room, there's no underground parking or further income from parking as a result of that. And I would say this is one of the nicer properties that we have, as you can see on pages 16 and 17. Still, the finish of this property and consequently the rents gained by this property pale into consideration with the properties that I presented as my comparables. So it follows that they should have different assessments and that they should have lower assessments per unit. It is natural. So I respectfully request that the cap rate is moved to 5.00. And based on the line of questioning that just happened, I would like to remind the board that I showed evidence in my submission, the cap rate submission showing properties with newer ages having higher cap rates than older properties. So we are unsure based on what was presented today as to whether age plays a difference, and if it does, how. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, Mr. Wong?
No questions.
Terry, questions? Ron?
I just have one, Omar. You are. I'm just looking at all your presentations here, and the city has varied their cap rate for various reasons, but you are consistent at 5%.
That's correct.
So that takes into account age, size, and location.
Thankfully, these properties are of a similar age, size, and perhaps not location, to the extent that I corroborate and fall in line with what Colliers, Cbre, and these companies attribute. So what they tend to do for these properties is just issue a range of, let's say, 5 to 6, but crucially, there's a low-rise A, low-rise B change. I think this is low-rise A, suburban, 4 to 6 stories, all wood frame. I believe they attain similar rents. That is our properties. And as a result, based on appraisal theory that I tend to follow and that I've seen in cities like the city of Calgary, where the multiplier for all low-rise properties over 30 units is the same. The Saskatoon Regina, I was just in appeals for Saskatoon, it's the same multiplier, which is just an errorless cap rate. BC, the offices in BC assessment tend to issue one cap rate for all low-rise properties in Kelowna and another for Penticton. So I'm just following what I have found to be common in appraisal theory and knowledge throughout Canada. And honestly, I'm just acting on the market evidence that I've seen. For example, I have presented sales in 3 different market zones, but I found the cap rate ranges to be very, very similar. As a result, I think that as you go far away from downtown Winnipeg, there's more amalgamation or homogeneous regions on the suburbs of Winnipeg that limit the effect of neighborhood on cap rate and how a reasonable investor would look at these properties. So yeah, that's why I went with the 5 cap rate, based on the sales, based on the reports.
So, my point is that you're using a 5% cap rate for all these properties, but they have variances in regards to, if you look at, some of them, the one was built in 2006 and one was built in 2020.
That's right.
But normally you would have, some sort of variance, would you not?
The variance comes in the NOI and the income and expenses. So it follows that a property built in 2020 will have higher income and lower expenses than the oldest property we're going to present today, which is River Meadows Estate that was built in 2006. Consequently, they will have different values. On the market, they will transact differently, but that difference is already attributed to by the income that has been assessed and agreed upon by myself and the Assessment Taxation Department. That then leaves the cap rate, which is it's the rate of return that is expected on the real estate investment submarket that is low-rise wood frame properties just in the city of Winnipeg and just as of the valuation date. So to answer your question, I believe that the variance has been already applied through different incomes, through different expenses, but that the cap rate should stay consistent. And that would also be consistent with what the city of Winnipeg has done ever since I'm aware of, which is 2012.
Well, I have a tendency to that there should be a variance in there. And I like, what you've done, but there should be a variance in there. And, you talk about NOI and expenses, etc. But like I say, there should be some sort of variance, in here.
I believe that if there was to be a variance, as per your comments, and it's completely comprehensible and reasonable to think so, it would indicate that the cap rates for the oldest properties should be higher than 5, which is why I'm respectfully requesting a minimum of a 5 cap rate for all the properties. Oh. If you think that the cap rate should, for example, for the 2010, 2006 buildings be even higher, then that could be supported by market evidence.
But however, it's nice to compare.
It is
apples, not apples to oranges.
I agree.
In an ideal world, but we're not.
Yes. In an ideal world, which is why I've been very careful with my request here. I believe I could have requested a higher cap rate for the older properties. I believe I could have requested a higher cap rate from all the properties, seeing that Colliers and Cbre have them at 5.525. However, I've been careful here not to be too greedy and to just look at what the evidence that I found was and what it told me. And the evidence that I found told me that the cap rates should be a minimum of 5. If the board believes that the cap rates for the older properties should be higher, then they're more than welcome to do so.
Point well taken. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I have no questions. So thank you very much on your presentations. Let's move on then finally to 1150 Racing Hands Road. I've been anxious to get to this one. So Mr. Wong, you can proceed.
The subject property is 1153 St. Anne's Road. The roll number is 080-210-70000. It's a residential apartment block that's 4 stories high. It was built in 2006-2007 and has 167 suites with 222 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is the location of the subject property with some pictures on page 4. Page 5 is a summary of our the income valuation summary. Page 6 are some rent comparables, and then page 7 is a summary of the income and expenses of the subject property. Page 8, 9, 10 is information on cap rates. And on page 12 is a summary, is the income statement for the subject property. The income and the expenses and the cap rate are supported by the market, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $27,730,000.
Okay, questions, Mr. Ashraf?
Yes, please, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to refer to page 6 again, rent comparables. Comparable 3 is 344 Bridge Lake Drive, which is one of the 2 properties that constitute the Pinnacle at Bridgewater, built in 2019, 208 units. I used this property in my cap rate study and analysis. Mr. Wong, you had already referenced that from your experience, it's conceivable that a property that attains more income will be assessed at a higher value than a property that attains lower income. Do you agree that comparable 3 has an average monthly rent of $1,464 while the subject has $1,384?
Yes.
Further, would you agree that the gross floor area per unit is 1,133 square feet versus 910?
Yes.
And you would agree the effective year built, there's a 13-year difference here, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Jerry, any questions of the assessment?
No questions.
Mr. Merritt?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right, we can begin then, Mr. Ashraf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am going to quickly reference page 9, which is a printout of the city's pro forma for how this assessment was derived. The cap rate is 4.85. This is the oldest property that Broad Street owns in Canada, 2006. It's the first property Broad Street built. It doesn't have the highest cap rate of the properties that we have on hand today. There are inexplicably properties with a 4.9 cap. However, this property attains a 4.8 cap. So I'm asking that this is corrected and a 5 cap is applied across the board based on the evidence that we have in front of us today. Only the evidence. Page 13 is a map of the property's location. And 15, you'll see how dated the property's exterior is. As mentioned, this property was built in 2006, which actually means that in 4 years, this property will fall back under rent control as per the Rent Control Act. For any property built after 2005 only has 20 years. This is how old this property is compared to other properties. You'll also see that on page 16 and 17. And on page 18 are photos of the community room in this property, which, makes me sound hypocritical. It's the oldest property. However, it does have a community lounge or a community room. But as you'll see, it's a mishmash of chairs and tables and IKEA furniture, nothing similar to the properties that we saw today, just a gathering space for tenants, but nothing that is as appealing or of value similar to the other lounges we looked at. So I respectfully request that the assessment is corrected and a minimum of 5.00 capitalization rate is applied, a minimum of 5.00. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Wong?
No questions.
Ron, questions?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Carrie? Okay, I just have one based on your comment. and maybe both parties can answer it, is as a property approaches rent control, would that raise the risk that a potential buyer might see in that property, and that they might view their income streams in the immediate future as being more restrained than if it's not subject to rent controls?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I would absolutely say so.
Mr. Wong, your opinion on that?
I don't know if I have too much information to say one way or the other, but if the market was able to bear really high rents, then the rent control would hurt. But if the market is kind of pretty flat, or the market rents are lowering, then a rent control probably wouldn't hurt the subject property.
All right, that was just a thought that some random neurons fired in my brain. Okay, let's go on to 745 Ballantyre Trace Drive.
Subject property is 745 Ballantyre.
Let me just open up the files here.
Okay.
All right, now you can proceed.
The subject property is 745 Ballantyre. The roll number is 030-930-03130. It's a residential apartment block that's 6 stories high, built in 2019. Has 141 suites with 76 indoor parking stalls and 131 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is the location of the subject property with an overhead view. Page 4 are some pictures of the subject property. On page 5 is the income valuation summary. On page 6 are some rent comparables. Income summary of the actual income statement from the subject property on page 7. On page 8, 9, and 10 is the cap rate information and support. Last page is the income statement for the subject property. So the rents and the cap rates are supported by the market, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $29,120,000.
Any questions, Mr. Ashraf?
Yes, please, Mr. Chairman. This is the last property where one of the rent comparables that I used is also used by the city. So I'll refer you to page 6, please. Rent comparable 1 is the same one from the last document that I had referenced. That is 344 Bridge Lake Drive, which constitutes one of the 2 buildings in the Pinnacle at Bridgewater that had a cap rate of 5.0 and 5.125. The gross floor area is higher in this property than the gross floor area per unit. Is that correct, Mr. Wong?
Yes.
And the rents per unit are almost $100 higher for each and every single unit, as per the income statement actually that was provided. Is that correct?
Yes.
Thank you. And that concludes my questions. I'd like to carry over the rest of my questions, please. Thank you.
Okay, are there any questions of the assessor?
Just one, Mr. Wong, concerning the vacancy. Says on, sorry, I've been skipping around here looking at other properties. Vacancy on page 5. It's sitting at 3.20. 4.20, thank you. Which is higher than the other properties that we've looked at so far. Do you want to make a comment on that?
It might have been reviewed and adjusted to be more in line with their actuals. That's possibility.
Okay, so you yourself didn't review this and make the change?
No.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I just have one more question. The cap rate on this property is 4.6?
Yes.
Okay, so on page 8 of your brief that you show the chart, there is no 4.6.
Well, those are the 80th percentile. If you look on the, actually, so there are cap rates that are lower than 4.6, 4.8.
So
But
I'm just wondering then, because this was built in 2019 and Panet Road was built in 2020, but it had a cap rate of 4.7.
yeah, unfortunately, I cannot explain the 0.1 difference. I can just say that there are cap rates that support the 4.6 and the 4.7 as 100 Southview would attest to, with that cap rate being, according to my calculation, 4.57.
Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chairman, I just have one final question. I think I'll conclude all my questions for all the properties. I hope so, please. The rebuttal that Mr. Wong that you provided had what you deemed was the correct, I presume, or what you would have used for income for one of the properties, that is 100 Southview Crescent. Why did you not provide different income and as a result different caps for the other properties, or are you in agreement with the stabilized income and expenses that I looked?
Sorry, could you repeat the question?
So I had 6 properties in my submission, in my cap rate analysis. They're the only properties that have been submitted as sale comparables, where you have indicated clearly that 2390 McPhillips, for example, is not a sale comparable. Then in the rebuttal, you provided different income and a different cap rate for one of the 6 properties that transacted. Is that just one? Is that correct?
Yes.
What about the other 5?
I think I could have, and actually I probably should have provided more calculations for a few of the other properties. They actually do support cap rate in the range of 3.6 or 3.8 to 4.9. So yeah, the South View was actually kind of in the middle at 4.57.
So is there a reason you chose not to do so?
I guess maybe I just wanted to keep it as simple as possible, but maybe I could provide more in the future.
Okay, thank you.
I think, Ron, we're at your question.
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
I have no questions. Yes. So, Mr. Ashraf, you can leave your presentation.
I'm sorry, Neil. I'm actually having a hard time hearing you right now.
Oh, sorry. I was looking down. Mr. Ashraf can begin his presentation on Balon Trade Drive now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So a reminder, as was mentioned, that the assessed cap rate for this property is 4.6. It's unsupported by the Cbre, Cushman, and Collier's reports that have been submitted by the city themselves, and is unsupported by all the market comparables that I submitted. 5 of them were not questioned by the assessor, just 1. The map and images of the property follow on page 13 and 14. You can see the location of the property. Page 15 is the exterior. So this is one of the first 6-story properties that we built with wood frame, which makes it slightly unique than the other properties. But across Canada, at least in Alberta and Saskatchewan, the decision has been made to view 6 to 8-story properties that are built as wood frame as low-rise. So this, in my opinion, is a low-rise property because it's made out of wood and not concrete. So it transacts similarly to the other properties. 16 and 17 is interior photos. Again, lower finish. It's on purpose, the lower finish, if I may. I'm sure some people will be ruffled in my company by saying so, but we attain lower rents. We're not trying to compete with the Rich Lakes and Otasis and Lumens of the world. We know where we stand. $100, $200 less than them in rent is what we ask for from our tenants. And this is what the finish looks like as a result. This is what the washing machine looks like for one of our newest properties. Page 17, you can see the interior. Again, no stainless steel appliances, no microwave. The finish in the kitchen is inferior to the comparables. Same thing you can see in 17. Now, this is the only property on the docket today that has a gym. As you can see on page 18, 2 treadmills, nothing to brag about, but does the job, and a little community lounge in the bottom too. But again, not comparable to the higher quality amenities found in superior properties that were presented today. As a result, I'm respectfully requesting, as you'll see on page 20, a minimum of a 5.00 cap rate to be applied based on the evidence that was submitted today by myself and the evidence that was submitted today by the city. Thank you.
Okay, questions, Mr. Wong?
No questions.
Carrie, questions?
No question.
Ron, questions?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to 590 Sterling Line. Okay, you can. Mr. Wong. 590 Sterling Line, Mr. Wong, you can begin.
The subject property is 590 Sterling Lion. The roll number is 100-067-75925. It's a residential apartment block that's 4 stories high. It's built in 2015, and it has 189 suites with 242 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is the location of the subject property with an overhead view. On page 5 are some interior pictures of the subject or on page on page 4 are the pictures. On page 5 is the our income valuation summary. Page 6 are some comparable rents. Page 8, 9, and 10 are some cap rate support. The last page is the income statement from the for the subject property. So the operating income is supported by the actuals and the cap rate is supported by market. So I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $42,643,000.
Any questions, Mr. Ashraf?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Merritt?
No, thank you.
Ms. Linkletter?
No questions, thank you.
I have no questions, so you can begin your presentation then, Mr. Ashraf.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will follow a similar line to the last few individual packages. I'd like to just quickly bring your attention to page 11, the aforementioned table that contained all the assessed cap rates initial versus the requested or corrected cap rate starting at 5 a minimum, hopefully. So this property at 590 Sterling Lion is built in 2015. It is in the same neighborhood as, just pull it up here quickly. It's in the same neighborhood as the property located at 225 Northtown Road. Above it, the property located in 225 Northtown Road was built in 2013, so it's older. However, that property has a lower cap rate. I'm unsure why. There's a 15 basis points difference, even though if one was to assume that age plays a difference, it follows that this property should have a lower cap rate than the other one. again, I'm unsure as to why. To quickly comment on the assessed value of this property per door, this property is assessed at $216,000 per door. That is higher than the sale prices of 3 of the properties that I showed. $216,000 per door is higher than 3 of the properties sale price values that I showed. And I would go on the record and say that I would assume at least that the time adjustments utilized by the city would decrease these sale prices because of the increased risk in the market. So this property is being assessed higher than the sale price of 3 unadjusted properties. The map follows on page 13. It's in the same neighborhood, Fort Garry Lindenwoods, as the Bishop Height Mullen Tree property and as the 2 properties that we have in the docket, I presume, I think. Yes, coming up. The map follows on page 14, properties location. Page 15 is the exterior, again, slightly dated, slightly older property. But on the interior, I mean, you've seen it already. It's again not stainless steel, lower quality, but it's one of the nicer ones. But still, I'm unsure as to why the $216,000 is being applied. It's why the 4.65 cap is being applied, or 4.8. Sorry, in this case. And that brings me to the last page. I respectfully request a minimum of 5.00 cap to be applied, which is a 20 basis points difference that will bring the assessed value to $40,942,000. And would, oh, apologies, I made a mistake here. The actual assessment per unit for the property is not 216, it's 225,000. Apologies here. The assessed value is 225. I'm requesting at 216, which would still be higher than the 3 of the 6. So the property is currently assessed at 225 per door. I just looked at the wrong thing here. And I'm respectfully requesting that it's corrected and an assessment of 216,000 per unit is applied, which would still be higher than 3 of the properties. Thank you.
Mr. Wong, questions?
No questions.
Carrie, any questions? Mr. Merritt?
I have none, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we'll go on to 225 North Town Road. So Mr. Wong, you can proceed.
Okay, the subject property is 225 North Town Road. The roll number is 030-915-64300. It's a residential apartment block that's 4 stories high. It's built in 2013 and has 112 units with 166 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is a picture of the location of the subject property with an overhead view. On page 4 are some pictures of the interior. On page 5 is our income valuation summary. Page 6 are some rent comparables. And page 7 is a summary of the income and expenses for the subject property. On page 8, 9, and 10 are information on cap rates and cap rate support. Last page, page 12, is the income statement for the subject property. And the value is supported by market, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $22,175,000.
Any questions, Mr. Ashcroft?
I just would like to know on page 5, because this goes back to another question that was asked before, that the assessed vacancy rate is 4.2, indicating that the model must be doing something for neighborhood, because this property is in the same neighborhood as the previous property that had a 4.2, which is Fort Garry Lindenwoods. And that's all I wanted to point out. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Wong, are you going to address that question on the vacancy?
I don't know if there's a question, was there?
Yeah, you're probably right there.
Just a quick question. I presume you're not aware of why the 4.2 is being applied, because you have indicated that you don't know how these vacancies and caps have been derived. So
I mean, it's possible that area could have a higher cap, a higher vacancy.
Yeah, so it's nowhere in your evidence, and you indicated already you're unsure, you don't know exactly. So I just chose not to ask, but chose to point out to the panel member and just let her know that 4.2 is being applied to other properties.
All right. Terry, any questions of the assessor?
No questions.
Mr. Merritt?
Just have one question, Mr. Wong. The rate that you're using on your property there is 4.65. It's the lowest cap rate. And I just noticed that the previous one was built in 2013. So was this one. So I know there's more suites in the Peguis, but why use the cap rate of 4.65?
I'm not sure, but the Sterling Lion area or Northtown, actually, I'm not sure what the difference is. Why it's 4.65.
Okay, I thank you. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Ashraf, you can begin your presentation then on Northtown Road.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the panel member, the question just asked regarding the cap rates being different negates my need to point that out again on page 11. We don't know why. It's unsupported. I'll just quickly go through the subject maps and images. For Mr. Wong already introduced this property really well. It's located in the south of the city, as you can see on page 13, still in the same market area for Gary Lindenwoods. And as you can see, you can see the subject images and the maps on the next few pages. Again, no stainless steel, no high finish, akin to most of the properties built between. Any of the properties built after 2010 tend to look similarly for Broad Street, unlike other competitors who put more money to try to get more attractive tenants and more rents. But we just find that we are in a happy place with the 200 less or 100 less area. Dollars per unit, that is. And that brings me to page 19. The request, again, based on the evidence that I provided today and based on the evidence that the city provided today, I respectfully request that a minimum of 5.00 cap is applied for the subject property, which will bring the value to $20,622,750. Thank you.
Questions, Mr. Wong?
No questions.
Carrie, questions?
I have no questions.
Ron, questions?
No, thank you.
All right, we'll come to the last property on today's agenda, 2475 Waverly. So Mr. Wong, you can proceed on that.
The subject property is 2475 Waverly. The roll number is 030-914-11100. It's a residential apartment block that's 4 stories high. It's built in 2016 and has 276 suites with 379 outdoor parking stalls. On page 3 is the location of the subject property with an overhead view. On page 4 are some pictures of the interior. On page 5 is the income valuation summary for this property. On page 6 are some rent comparables. And page 7 is the summary of the income and expenses for the subject property. On page 8, 9, and 10 is information on our cap rates and support. And on page 12 is the income statement for the subject property. And the assessed value is supported by the market, and I ask that you maintain the assessed value at $59,637,000.
Any questions, Mr. Ashraf?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just like to carry forward my previous questions.
Okay, Ron, questions?
None, thank you.
Eric, questions? Okay, Mr. Ashraf, you can begin your presentation.
Thank you. Last one. So the property is located at 2475 Waverly Street. As you can see on the table, that is on page 11. The property is attaining a 4.8 cap. No evidence has been provided to support or explain how that number was derived. The property has the highest number of units, apart from the Panay Road property at 276 units. The maps and images follows. The property again is in the Fort Garry Lindenwoods neighborhood, as you can see on page. Oh, this is unnumbered. I apologize. Page 13. And a reminder that I did present sales today that were in the same exact area. Those were the Pinnacle at Bridgewater, and they were all in close proximity to the properties in this market area. And it's the only market evidence for cap rate for this neighborhood that has been presented by neither party. Another couple maps follow on the next page. And then photos of the interior, again, lower finish, lower rents. You can see on this 2 pages before the end, for the last page, the exterior, slightly dated, 2016 now, so it's a 6-year property, 6-year-old property. And on the last page is my request. I respectfully request, based on the evidence provided by myself and based on the evidence provided by the city, that the board come to the decision of applying a minimum of 5.00 cap for this property. All the sales indicate that that should be the case, and all the reports by the reputable companies that we looked at today indicate that should be the case at a minimum. Thank you.
Any questions, Mr. Wong?
No questions.
Harry, any questions? Ron, questions?
No, thank you.
All right, so that concludes this property. We have heard all the items scheduled at this time, and this hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wong.
Thank you. Good day.